Hello, I did it again where I disappeared for a little while, but I am back to talk about the clinical experience really. I think there's like a few things that I think are important to touch on, but I don't want this to be super long, so I'm going to try to be as condensed as I can be while still being detailed about the things that I want to be detailed about. When I started clinicals, I really didn't know what my purpose was, and I don't know if that was just me being ignorant or not really looking into it, or if it was just kind of not explained to us appropriately. But I think now, being on the other side of things, I realize that clinical is really a learning opportunity. So whatever that looks like for you as a student going into clinicals, you kind of have to advocate for that for yourself. There are some students that might feel really comfortable going into a patient's room on the first day and doing an assessment on their own. So if you feel like that is the level that you're at on your first day, you can ask for that. And obviously your instructor will kind of dictate a lot of how your experience goes, whether they're comfortable with you doing that or whether they prefer to be present while you do it. Either way, there has to be some sort of middle ground that you can align on. And if you're feeling like it's the fourth day and you still are feeling a little anxious about going into a patient's room, ask to double up with another student, ask for the instructor to come in with you, ask to do it with one of the nurses. I would encourage you to kind of figure out what works for you and go with it. It's a really, really exciting time. I think another really unique privilege of being a student is that you are able to sit in a patient's room for 20 minutes and chat with them and listen to them. I often found that the more challenging patients really just wanted someone to hear them out. I had that happen several times, and a lot of nurses would tell me, like, don't bother with that patient, they're just difficult, or they're impossible to please, or they will like not stop talking to you forever, blah blah blah. I get it, because on the one hand you're treading this fine line of like, I don't want to make things harder for the nurses, and if I engage with this patient for a long period of time, maybe their expectations are that nurses are able to do that and they will be therefore more demanding in the future. Or if I speak to this patient, they might just feel like their needs are being met for that moment, and they might feel more cared for, and that might calm them, for the rest of the shift or for the remainder of their time in the hospital. It's hard to know which way your interaction will go, but I always felt like I really tried to follow my heart in those situations. You can really make a big difference. I would say my first semester of clinical rotations, I kind of felt like a fish out of the water, because I didn't know whether I was supposed to be a fly on the wall. I didn't know if it was okay for me to ask things. I didn't know if I was in the way. I felt like I was wanting to be helpful but didn't have the tools to actually be helpful. But a good way to at least feel useful, and I think a lot of times be useful, is like answering call bells, finding a nurse to chat to that is willing to explain things to you that you might want to like follow around from room to room. And obviously it largely depends on how your instructor structures your clinical time. But again, that's very much something that you can talk together about to make sure that everybody's on the same page and getting the most out of the experience. My second rotation, I definitely felt a little bit more confident. I was feeling more comfortable going into patients' charts and looking at things, and being a little bit more comfortable with the terminology in the nursing notes, the physician notes. And you can pull your instructor aside and be like, hey, can you explain what this means to me? Jot things down in a little notebook. I feel like that's so helpful, because in the moment you're like, yeah, I'll remember this, but there's so much that you won't remember it. So it's like nice to have things jotted down that you can then reference when you get home, or look up further when you get home, and you're kind of just building your knowledge base a little bit more in like a more systematic way. Apart from writing down like logistical things like that, There are several students in my program who have written down all of their clinical experiences as they occur, and I think it is such a wonderful idea to do that. My dad has always been someone that tells me, write everything down, everything that you experience, because you think you'll remember it, but the way you remember it is never how it actually felt in the moment, and the only way that you'll know is if you write that. So I wish I would have done that and listened to my dad's advice, but I unfortunately didn't. I just thought like, oh, I'm too busy, it's fine, I'll like whatever. But I really think it's one of the greatest gifts that you can gift yourself is, you know, a little memory book of all the things that you've seen, all the things that you had questions about, and you can really see the journey that you've taken in the time of your program. So the first 2 rotations of our program are general like med-surg type rotations, and then we start getting into the 5x5s. So 2 of those are also med-surg rotations, which honestly, med-surg floors are really wonderful learning opportunities. You learn so much, and there's always so much need and so much going on that I felt useful as well. Pediatrics and maternity are such different patient experiences. Pediatrics, you're interacting with the children, but you're also very likely interacting with the family in a very different capacity than you would be on a med-surg unit where you're interacting with family. And in OB, it's just a totally different set of needs. So there is kind of that like dissonance and trying to find your footing and like, I don't know, your place in these new units. I felt that psych was one of the more interesting ones, like internally for me, because I wasn't fully sure how to interact with patients. We were given strict instructions to not talk about ourselves at all with patients. The most that we could tell them was that we were nursing students at Columbia, because our uniform obviously says Columbia, our badges say Columbia, so that was about as much information as we could give. But it's hard to have conversations when you are deviating from yourself, and patients would really ask like, oh, so do you have siblings? Do you live here? Where do you live? Like all these things, and to be like, anyway, do you have siblings? It felt, I think sometimes patients pick up on that, and it just creates this like weird cut in the relationship that you are trying to develop at that point. I also felt, I think I'm gonna struggle to find the words to say this, but I think in psych, consent is a little bit more blurred to me in my mind, because it wasn't really physiological needs that were having to be met. It was all very much like mental, emotional, psychosocial needs. For me, it just felt like I was being intrusive, and obviously I think it's important to have these kinds of rotations. I gained a lot of insight into different stigmatized subjects. I think for me it was just a little bit hard. I did, however, have, it felt like kind of a life-changing experience to me on a substance misuse unit. I got to sit in on an intake, which was one of the most fascinating things I have ever experienced. But I think it was so unlike anything I've ever witnessed that I think I dissociated a little bit, and at any moment it felt like they were going to be like, cut, great job everyone, we're going to do one more take, and like adjust the lights and the mics and whatever. But no, it was very much real life, and it was so eye-opening, and I am just like praying for this patient that they really got out of it what they were hoping to get out of it, and that they are now living a fulfilled sober life. And I just pray that they never relapse again, because it's so sad. I mean, I want that for every single patient, but seeing that intake in the flesh was something I don't think I'll ever be able to describe. And I wish I could, because I wish that everybody had that experience. Then we have integration. So this is where we spend, it was supposed to be 6 weeks, but because of the nursing strikes, it ended up being 5 weeks, which felt like a good amount of time. You're following a nurse for 5 weeks, like on their schedule. So you're doing a minimum of 3 12-hour shifts if you're at like a regular hospital, I guess. But I think there were some hospitals that did like 9 to 5 type vibes, maybe 4 days a week or something. I don't know, something. But yeah, you rank the placings that you want to be in, and then you get placed and you do what you are told. I was in the NICU for mine, which felt like such a full circle moment, because I came into nursing thinking that I wanted to be a NICU nurse, and then I kind of switched over while I was in school to liking labor and delivery a little bit more. I think my goal in the future is to be a midwife. My first choice was actually labor and delivery. My second choice was NICU. I got placed in the NICU. I grieved labor and delivery for a hot second, but then I was actually really excited to start my journey at the NICU, because it's what I thought I would want to do. And I actually really loved NICU nursing. So that was so wonderful, but I think I struggled a little bit on the unit that I was on, because I didn't love some of the culture that had been normalized. I wish I felt comfortable to say what it was, but I don't, so I won't. And I think this is true for all units. Every unit is going to have cons, and things that maybe clash a little bit with your own personal values or morals or viewpoints. And I think that it was a learning experience in that sense as well. Other than that, it was a really wonderful experience. I feel like I learned so much, and I'm ultimately really glad that I stayed here in the US, because integration can also be done globally at our program. And before I even applied, I was sure that I was going to go global. And then maybe like 2 weeks into the semester, the first semester, I was kind of thinking like, maybe I don't want to go global. I think I wanted to stay put for a while. A lot of my life has been like back and forth between places, and I was like, for the first time, I just want to be in one place. And also, I think I started realizing this is so serious. Like, I am going to be a nurse back then, like, in less than 2 years. And I like want to make sure that I have as much experience as I can in order for me to feel confident. That's not to say that going global would like mess me up in any way, but I just felt like for me, I wanted New York experience. Let me drink some water. I feel like I've been talking up a storm. I think that kind of sums up my clinical experience, and I will leave this video with a little story. It was my first day of my first ever med-surg rotation, and I'm like trying to figure out what my role is, what I'm supposed to do with my hands, with my feet, with my face. Like, I'm like really trying to be in the moment and like figure it out at the same time. And then my instructor grabs me and a few other students, and he's like, all right, we have a patient, you need to give a bed bath. And I was like, oh my God, okay, we're giving a bed bath. I had practiced this in the lab, never in real life. I was ready. So I really wasn't. I didn't know what to expect, but like I was ready to have the experience of like not knowing what the heck I'm doing. So different outside of the lab. So this patient, it seems like he had perhaps had a stroke. He was like an older Latino patient, and he was fecal incontinent, and so he had just had a bowel movement and he needed to be cleaned. we go in, everyone's like, just assumes a position. We don't really know what we're getting ourselves into. My instructor's like, all right, go fill the bucket with warm water, put some soap in there. This is what we're going to use to clean him. He also had a urinary catheter, which, like, when we do our bed baths in the lab, like none of those scenarios is there a catheter involved. So then I was like, wait, how do we like make sure that none of this goes on the catheter? And like it just felt very overwhelming, and it felt like, okay, 1 2 3, do it, blah 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 blah. And I just would have wished that we had taken a moment to go in and introduce ourselves to the patient and say, hi, we're here to do this, regardless of whether or not he understood or was aware. I thought that would have been a really important thing to do, and to, as a group, decide like, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. We'll turn him, we'll move him, we'll wipe, we'll clean, we'll, dry, and then that's it. So at the end of all of that craze, the patient kept like moaning and groaning during it. So I just presumed that he was uncomfortable, and my heart broke every single time, because I cannot imagine that being comfortable in any way. And then everybody finished, we took our gloves off. Like, I don't even remember the full, everything that was going on, but we like readjusted his bed, we readjusted him. And then my instructor was like, great, you're okay, you're all done, to the patient. And then everybody kind of just walked out. And I couldn't bring myself to just walk out of the room after that whole experience. This having been my first direct experience with patient care, I just felt compelled to go up to him, because I was like not by the head of the bed, I was further down, cleaning. So then I went up to the head of the bed and I held his hand, and I didn't know whether he would hold mine, but he did. And it was this very I could tell he was saying a lot by the way he held my hand. And I looked at him, and I like peered over to make sure he could see me, and he like looked over, he turned his head and he looked over at me and like closed his eyes again. And I said to him, like, in Spanish, you're all clean now, like, does that feel better? And he like couldn't really understand me, and I said, we cleaned you up, you're all clean. And he just opened his eyes a little bit and he said, es cosa buena, which means like it's a good thing. And I held his hand for a little bit longer, and he was just like kind of smiling. He seemed so satisfied. And then he was trying to say other things,